Sunflower Electric Power Corporation, cooperative members working together to generate power so you can enjoy the benefits of life in central and western Kansas. Sunflower Electric Power Corporation, energy done right.
Good evening, and welcome to our second session for our Candidates Forum 2020, this Thursday, October the 22nd. I'd like to welcome everybody and those viewing in on the Salina media stream. We appreciate your concern and care for this election that's coming up. I'd like to introduce myself as James Lambert. I'm the board chair of the 2020 Salina Area Chamber of Commerce. This forum is sponsored by the Salina Area Chamber of Commerce and the League of Women's Voters. It features candidates for Kansas House Representative 71st District. Printed profiles by the Chamber on all the candidates can be found at the Chamber office, on the Chamber's website, which is www.salinakansas.org, the County Clerk's office, and the Salina Public Library. The candidates also completed questionnaires for the Salina League of Women's Voters. Those are available at the League of Women's Voters website, which is www.lwvsalina.org. I'd also like to thank the candidates and the media members for being here this evening and for following our safety protocols as we deal with the COVID-19 issues. This forum is being recorded by the Smoky Hill Public Television for future airings, and it's also in connection with the Salina Media Group. At this time, I'd like to introduce our two candidates this evening. First, Mr. Jeffrey Zammerslaw, and then Mr. Steve Howe from the 71st District. This time I'd like to introduce Amy Adams, my co-moderator, and she will go over the evening's events and rules. Amy, thank you.
Thank you. I will briefly go over the format and the rules for this evening's forum. Each candidate will be allowed a 1-minute opening remark. We will alternate questions between the candidates. First, we will cover questions from our media panel, and then we will move on to submitted questions from the public. Candidates will have 1 minute to answer questions, and then they will each be allowed 1 minute for a closing remark. We will now begin by allowing for 1 minute for an opening remark, starting with Mr. Howe.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for having me out this evening, and thank you to the Salina Area Chamber of Commerce and the Salina League of Women Voters and the Salina Media Connection for making this all possible. Hi, my name is Stephen Howe. I'm a Republican running for House District 71. This is my first time running for public office. I decided to enter into this race because last spring, as I was teaching, and the global pandemic was spreading to the lower 48 of the United States and into Kansas too, I read an article in one of the newspapers that stated that about 2/3 of the state legislature was an at-risk population. And I felt like it was my duty to step up as a younger leader in my community to put my name out there to try to represent the 22,000 people of the 71st District.
Thank you, Mr. Howe. Now an opening comment from Mr. Zammerslaw.
Hi, I as well would like to thank the Chamber of Commerce and the League of Women Voters for inviting us. My name is Jeff Zammerslaw. I was raised in Salina. I'm from Salina. I did move away to join the Marines and then had a long career as a electrician. I'm one of the senior citizens you're talking about. I have been involved with politics for well over 30 years, and it's time for things to change. We need people in our legislature that actually want to find solutions instead of bicker. I'm asking for everybody's vote so that we can get something done.
Thank you. Now back to James for the media questions.
Thank you, Amy. I'd like to, at this time, thank the media for joining us this evening and take this opportunity to present one of those individuals, Mr. Paul Kirkwood from the Salina Media Connection, Mr. Todd Pittenger from Rockingham Radio, and Mr. Charles Rankin from the Salina Journal. Thanks again to you, all three of you, for being here. And now we will take questions for the media. Who would like to go first?
In the midst of a pandemic, healthcare is a really important issue for Kansans. Oklahoma and Missouri have both, in the last year, voted to expand Medicaid to their states, which means all 4 surrounding states of Kansas have expanded Medicaid. What are your thoughts on the idea of expanding Medicaid in the state, and how can we make healthcare a priority in Kansas?
Me first?
Mr. Howe.
Oh, thank you for the question. Yes, Medicaid expansion is definitely a topic of conversation, not only this year, but in previous sessions of the legislature. However, because of the global pandemic, it's upended our economy, as you may know. According to some of the budget experts, they've forecasted budget deficits starting in January, when the legislative session would begin, up to $600 million. So I am not sure, I'm very skeptical about expanding a program that would cost more money. Also, the budget projections show at the end of the fiscal year it could be well over $1.2 billion. So I'm very hesitant to say, yes, let's expand a government program when we might have a lot of trouble affording what we currently have to pay for. So.
Thank you, Mr. Howe. We'll go to Mr. Zammerslaw.
It really is an important subject. I'm in favor of expanding Medicaid. Several reasons. One, we're seeing rural hospitals closing because they can no longer keep their doors open because they're just not making enough money. The Affordable Care Act was modeled on economic theory of low profit, high volume, the Walmart model. And the only way that hospitals and doctors can receive enough money is to expand it. And we are leaving billions of dollars on the table that we could be receiving from the federal government for that. The amount that Kansas has to chip in, oh my, I just went blank. I think it's 30%, it might be 40. I think we can come up with some numbers, though, that would allow those hospitals to stay open.
Thank you, Mr. Zammerslaw. Next question from the media, please.
We are now in the 7th month of the COVID-19 pandemic. Data as of yesterday from the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, and this is in terms of new cases and the percent positive test rates, continue to suggest that community spread is still prevalent across Kansas, and now it's really shifting more to rural areas. 2/3 of the new cases are now outside the Kansas City metro area and the Wichita area, which means it's spreading into rural areas of Kansas, the smaller communities. How do you assess the state's response to the pandemic so far? Have we done enough? Have we not done enough? Has it been what we needed to do? What is your assessment of the state's response to the pandemic?
We'll go to you, Mr. Zammerslaw, first.
Okay, where do we start on that one? There's a lot to unpack there in a short time. Governor came out and led on this issue when she closed the schools. And I know it put a lot of people in dire straits because she did that. All of a sudden they needed help. They needed somebody to take care of their kids. Well, they worked. But when the Legislative Council of Elders, for lack of a better word, overruled her and said that, no, we can't do this way, that put into motion several things that we're seeing play out now. The leading indicators, well, death being one, is behind by 2 weeks. And for every case that's diagnosed, we have 10 cases that are not diagnosed. So all we're seeing is the tip of the iceberg. We've got to do more.
Thank you, Mr. Zammerslaw. Mr. Howe?
Yes, we are certainly in unprecedented times. Kansas is no stranger to pandemics. The 1917 pandemic, of course, hit very close to home here. Kansans are resilient. They're strong, and they're capable. We have a lot of great communities across our state, and many people are doing great things to work together to keep not only schools open, but to keep people safe. So I am not one to sit up here and criticize the response by our state government and officials. Could we do more? Yes, perhaps we could, especially the most vulnerable populations of people, the elderly that live in nursing homes. I'm very concerned about their isolation during this global pandemic. So I say we continue to work hard and work together to ensure the safety of all Kansans.
Thank you, Mr. Howe. Next question from the media, please.
In the event of a conflict between city ordinances and state legislation, are you supportive of state legislation maintaining or overruling local ordinances?
Mr. Howe.
Do you have any specific examples?
I guess the most prominent one now that we're wrestling with is a mask mandate. But
okay. I see. Yeah, thank you for the question. It's very relevant. I do support local control of whether it's education or things like mask mandates. I do believe that government closest to the people can respond the most effectively. So I do support Salina County and the city of Salina having that authority to make those decisions, whether it's a USD 305 school district or it's the county or city commission. So I would support protecting the home rule concept.
Thank you, Mr. Howe. Mr. Zammerslaw.
Well, I do support home rule to an extent. As with all things, I think the state should set regulational standards, and then I think that the counties and the cities should refer to those standards and devise their plan from that. I'll let it go at that.
Thank you, Mr. Zammerslaw. Next question from the media, please.
With the pandemic, we can more than likely expect a budget shortfall at the state level. So barring some federal aid, what are some revenue sources that you could see help accomplish making up for this shortfall, such as legalizing marijuana or sports betting?
Mr. Zammerslaw, please.
It's funny you should bring that up. That's one of my, my favorite topics. I think that we need to completely legalize marijuana and make it retroactive so that the hundreds of thousands of people in the state who have misdemeanor convictions have those annulled. I think that it's an exciting new revenue stream if we look at the states that surround us. I'm not going to say it's a plethora and it's going to fix all of our ails, but it can go a long ways towards it. But the state has to regulate it, has to do the job correctly in order for that to happen.
Thank you, Mr. Zammerslaw. Mr. Howe.
Did you mention medical marijuana or recreational marijuana? Marijuana, okay. Personally, I don't support what is deemed as medical marijuana. However, I am open to having hearings on byproducts of cannabis. I do support industrial hemp production in the state. And it's hard to say if there's a silver bullet that's going to make up for the revenue that we might be facing during the next legislative session. We're going to have to examine the budget line by line to see what the most effective way to do that is. But I think the best thing to do is to try to keep the economy open, keep small businesses open on Main Street, and people employed. I think that's the best thing that we can do to generate revenue in our communities.
Thank you, Mr. Howe. Next question from the media, please.
With the pandemic, we've had record numbers of unemployment. I know some people are back on the job now. Initially, at the national level, we did have some help for the unemployed, but that ran out on July 1st. And at the national level, they've not been able to get their heads together to come up with any sort of a plan. At the state level, if anything, what should we do to give a little extra to those who are unemployed right now? Should we give a little extra to those who are unemployed right now?
Mr. Howe?
Well, should we? That's a great question. How do we pay for it? You know, is there anything currently in the budget that would allow the governor or the legislature to shift funds from an unused portion to something like that? I don't know. But we definitely can do better in terms of responding to claims that are pending. With technology, we can certainly do that. I think the Secretary of Labor had to step down because it got so bad during this past year. And Kansans deserve better. Kansas workers deserve a better response time on their unemployment claims. And so I think that bureaucratic red tape needs to be improved. And we can do that with technology.
Thank you, Mr. Howe. Mr. Zamerslaw?
We have just begun to climb out of the hole that we were put in by the Great Experiment. Charles Lapper's supply-side economic theory. Ronald Reagan implemented it in 1981, 1982, and then reversed it before his first re-election in '84. Sam Brownback decided that it was going to be the great plethora to get businesses going. Well, it didn't work. Instead, he opened the Bank of KDOT and robbed our state transportation network of being able to adequately do what it needed to do. We can give them some money. We've got a new rainy day fund that the governor started. I don't know how much is in it, but I think that we need to look at it.
Thank you, Mr. Zamerslaw. Mr. Howe? Oh, excuse me. Oh. Next question from the media, please. Sorry.
It's all right. The Ogallala Aquifer covers 175,000 square miles and is shared by 8 states. In the event of a water shortage, what should the state legislature do to address it?
Mr. Zamerslaw?
Man, that's a great question. It's been going dry for a long time. I don't have any current data on it, but I know it's been, the level has been sinking on maybe 10, 15 feet per year because of all the draw on it. No-till crops, cover crops would go a long ways towards farmer irrigation. Recovery for the aquifer, I'm not sure that we can do anything without having a multi-state compact. There is one in existence right now, however, it's in disarray. We need all of the states that are drawing water from it to step up and take responsibility. Otherwise, we're going to have a huge desert.
Thank you, Mr. Zamerslaw. Mr. Howe?
Thank you for the question. We certainly would need more snow to fall in Colorado. Okay, really bad joke, I'm sorry. But basically, you know, you have a lot of snowfall that would come down through the Arkansas River, and we do have a compact with the state of Colorado to have a certain part of that surface water come our way, as we do with Nebraska as well, up on the Republican River. But in terms of groundwater, a lot of that water is used for irrigation and agriculture. It could be used for ethanol plants and all sorts of different industrial applications. We have a set of water rights that are administered in the state, whether it's a junior right or a senior right. So I think we would have to examine water law in depth a little bit more. And that is one issue that Governor Sam Brownback led on, is developing a 50-year water plan. So I'd be interested to see what Governor Kelly is doing in response to follow up on that.
Thank you, Mr. Howe. Next question from the media, please.
We've seen with people working from home and with education moving to online or hybrid models, and seen that broadband internet access is a key part of that. How do you feel is the state government's job or the state government's role in allowing broadband internet access to rural communities and to underserved urban communities?
Mr. Howe, your response, please.
If you look over the last 20 years, there's been millions and millions of dollars by way of the federal government that have come back to the state for the expansion of broadband internet. So I don't know if it's a matter of money. There are a lot of private companies that are also expanding their networks as well across the state. I think the main thing is to keep people in our rural communities, to give them jobs, affordable housing, and opportunities. And broadband is part of that, but I don't know if it's something that you can just throw money at. Because by evidence of the last 10 to 20 years, there's been millions and millions of dollars that have gone into expanding fiber to our rural communities.
Thank you, Mr. Howe. Mr. Zammerslaw.
Okay, first, Sam Brownback, he actually wanted the Holcomb power plant, which would have drawn over 1 billion gallons of water from the aquifer each year. I was very opposed to that, and I made a lot of money being an electrician on power plants. I am a union electrician, retired. Next, I think that we have to step back and take a look at the advantages of having broadband in rural communities. The biggest advantage is the hybrid teaching model that you were just talking about, or distance learning. Faster speeds for people to, for their kids to learn in school in real time. So we've got to expand it. And the governor's working on that now.
Thank you, Mr. Zammerslaw. Next question from the media, please.
I live in the 69th district, so unfortunately, neither of your names will be on my ballot.
You could move.
Well, you'd have to clear that with my wife first,
Okay.
I think. What is on my ballot and on everyone's ballot is the question of should we build a new jail here in Salina and Saline County because overcrowding. Simply, our jail is too crowded. I know that's a local issue, but in the bigger picture, I'm told that the overcrowding perhaps needs to be handled at the state level. How can you help in the situation with the Saline County Jail, and I guess jails across Kansas, in Topeka at the state level?
Mr. Zammerslaw, please.
Well, we could reduce recidivism by legalizing marijuana. And Salina does have a program where we send people into a deferral program if they are willing to go to treatment. That is one thing, but the recidivism, Bill Graves, long ago, decided that the state no longer should be in the mental health care business. And I know much of the recidivism we see in our jail are people who are mentally ill that need medication and can't buy it. So it's a multi-pronged approach. We reduce the jail overcrowding by fewer people, restore Medicaid benefits, and also put the state back in the business of providing mental health.
Thank you, Mr. Zammerslaw. Mr. Howe?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I just did I attended a presentation locally by the Saline County Sheriff's Office about the jail expansion project, and I learned that every year $6 million is spent in housing our inmates in other county jails, and that is certainly a problem. That is a huge chunk of change. And so I understand why they are putting this on the ballot for the voters of Saline County to decide. That's a lot of money to spend sending to other counties. I think eventually a project like this would pay for itself. What can the state legislature do to assist counties like Saline County? Well, that is a very good question because a lot of these crimes are committed here in Saline County. So again, going back to the home run or the home rule, that's best dealt here locally. There could be some other opportunities to support our corrections officers through some additional funding.
Thank you, Mr. Howe. Next question from the media, please.
As you both know, this is a vitally important year because the time of redistricting is upon us. Would you support the formation of a nonpartisan district reorganizing committee rather than gerrymandering new districts in the upcoming legislative session?
Mr. Howe.
I do not support a nonpartisan commission. What do you mean by nonpartisan? Some people define that differently, but it is the constitutional responsibility of the state legislature to work on redistricting. It is unfortunate that last time the legislature was afforded that opportunity, they really kicked the can down the road. Unfortunately, some federal judges had to get involved because they didn't meet their deadlines, and they redrew some of the districts. At the time, I was working for a U.S. congressman, and there was all sorts of wild ideas coming from out of state of how we should redraw or gerrymander districts. I do not support gerrymandering for political gain. This is something that we need to work on together to ensure that each person has representation.
Thank you, Mr. Howe. Mr. Zammerslaw?
It's difficult not to say, yeah. I do support a commission. My problem is when you elect people to government that distrust government, you get a government you distrust. That's what we have now is a government we distrust in general. There's been so many people, media people, TV, one network in particular I won't mention, that have done nothing but want to strangle government in a bathtub. Long ago, there was a guy by the name of Arthur Dean who wrote a report for FDR in 1933 who said, we don't want a government that's chrome-plated, we just want one that works. The only way for this to work is to have an independent commission that makes every district competitive.
Thank you, Mr. Zammerslaw. Next question from the media, please.
We see many people in Kansas and across the nation as divided and polarized in some ways. If you're elected, how do you plan to bridge some of that divide in your role as a legislator and work across the aisle with colleagues that differ from you?
Mr. Zammerslaw, we'll go to you first on that.
Probably the most difficult relationship I've ever had is with Brenda Landworth. She proposed an ALEC, American Legislative Exchange Council, bill many years in a row called Tabor. We saw what Tabor could do in Colorado. Tabor is the taxpayer's Bill of Rights. And what it does is it ratchets down the amount of revenue the state can pull in every year. Well, about 20 years ago, we saw that Colorado, their roads were crumbling because they could no longer afford to do it. And it's a constitutional amendment. So every year now, Colorado has to pass a new law and have it approved by 2/3 vote to fund their infrastructure. I got along with her. It took some time. We found some common ground, but we did get along. So.
Thank you, Mr. Zammerslaw. Mr. Howe?
If elected to the Kansas legislature, by statute, we are required to work together to pass a budget. And so I am eager, if elected, to represent the great people of the 71st District in a bipartisan way. I don't represent 5,000 or 16,000, it's 22,000. Whether they're a toddler, a teenager, or someone that's retired. I will try to do my best to represent all people at all ages and work to find common ground. One area of common ground that we could work on would be to look for ways to lower our state or utility rates in our state, to make Kansas more competitive, to attract good jobs, and to keep and retain good jobs that we currently have.
Thank you, Mr. Howe. I think we have time for one more question from the media panel.
We mentioned a $1 billion debt is what the state will be facing here when the new budget comes out, $1 billion. You mentioned legalizing marijuana. What are some other ideas, revenue sources? What are some ideas you have to deal with that $1 billion deficit?
Mr. Howe?
So if you look at every dollar that the state of Kansas collects, 63 cents of every dollar goes to K-12 education and higher education. 28 cents of every dollar goes towards Medicaid and social services. That leaves less than 10 cents per dollar for everything else. So budgets are pretty tight. A lot of things are already spoken for in our state budget. So, in terms of looking for more revenue, I don't believe that we should legalize more controlled substances to raise revenue. I don't believe in expanding casinos or gaming because I'm not sure that really creates wealth. We need to produce things, to manufacture things, and to export those to the global marketplace.
Thank you, Mr. Howe. Mr. Zamerslaw?
Well, we do agree that we do need to create wealth, and the way to do that is by creating jobs. The service industry doesn't create jobs. It services people that come through tourism, hotels. If, you know, like the lead sled that we missed this year, which I dearly missed, that brings in a lot of money, but it's only one event. Manufacturing jobs, Salina had some success. Some of the other cities around the state have had some success as well. However, as manufacturers have fled the United States for cheaper pastures, we're faced with a dilemma. How do we create jobs and good paying jobs with people that don't want to hire you? I don't have an answer, but I'm willing to listen to somebody that does.
Thank you, Mr. Zamerslaw. So that concludes our questions from the media panel today, or this evening, and now I'm going to turn it over to my esteemed colleague, Amy Adams, to address some questions from the audience. Thank you.
Thank you. The questions I will be asking you tonight were submitted by the public prior to tonight's forum. So we'll start with a really foundational question. Why are you seeking this office, and what do you hope to accomplish? And we'll start with Mr. Zamerslaw.
I'm seeking this office because we need a legislature that works with the governor. We don't need an adversarial relationship with Laura Kelly. We need a relationship of mutual trust and benefit for the entire state. Most Kansans realize that there are 5 counties in this state that can elect anyone to statewide office, whether it be federal or state office. I'd like to see Salina and other rural communities be able to have more influence.
Thank you. Mr. Howe?
Yes, thank you. Hi, I'm Stephen Howe, running for House District 71. I appreciate the live streamed audience that is out there. I can't see you, but I know you're there. And again, appreciate the opportunity. This is the first time I'm running for public office. I'm a husband, a father of 4 boys, a small business owner here in Salina, which we've had in operation in downtown Salina for 13 years. I got into this race because based on my years of experience of working for 2 different members of Congress, and focusing on constituent services. In constituent services, I work with farmers, veterans, small business owners, people at their wits' end with their government. They turned to our office and they gave me a call, and I worked to help them out. So I want to bring a level of service, a servant leadership to the office, and I would appreciate your vote.
Thank you. Several of the questions we received were about taxes. So let's start with a really general question. Could you rank in order what taxes you would cut? And we'll start with Mr. Howe.
Thank you. I have signed a pledge, the Taxpayer Protection Act. I have pledged not to raise taxes on hardworking Kansans or any Kansans, whether they're on a fixed income or they're just out of college with their first job. I will not raise taxes. I think there is one area that we could definitely work both sides across the aisle on, and that's the sales tax on food. I know that is something the governor had mentioned when she first ran for office, and I would certainly welcome the opportunity to look at that particular tax.
Thank you. Mr. Zamerslaw?
Well, food sales tax, I agree on that. That needs to be done away with, but property taxes are crazy. One of the big reasons I moved back to Salina from Topeka when I retired is because property taxes in Salina or Saline County are half what they are in Topeka, and they're still high. We need to quit relying on property owners to fund the state. If that means that we need to revisit depreciation on machinery for manufacturers, or, I'm sorry, even some farm machinery. When I was a kid, when we farmed, we didn't have a tractor with the air conditioner in it and a radio. We sat out there and sweat all day on it. We bucked bales. We had all the kids from the family, all my cousins and myself were out there bucking bales all day too. So I think that there are revenue streams that we have priced ourselves out of.
Thank you. One of the most difficult things for working families is to find affordable child care. Do you support a child care tax credit? We'll start with Mr. Zamerslaw.
Yes, I do support it. I think that unless we can actually create a living, working wage, then we need to give all the help we can to Kansans who are just trying to get by.
Thank you. Mr. Howe?
Would this be in addition to the federal child care tax credits at the state level?
I'm assuming so.
Okay.
It doesn't specify.
I would certainly welcome a discussion and have hearings on this to see, different proposals. I would certainly welcome the opportunity to support Kansas families. I want to encourage life. I want to, see our future generations thrive and succeed. And Salina's been fortunate to have some very generous people step into the child care sector to support it. And so I'm very thankful to see that here in this community, a very generous community. But can we do that on the state level in terms of our tax code? I'm open to looking at that to see the devil's in the details, as most legislation is.
Thank you. Do you support eliminating various sales tax exemptions in the state of Kansas to raise revenue? And that'll go to you, Mr. Howe.
Sales tax exemptions. Certainly they discussed that years back. We could certainly do the same thing. It's a fairly general question. There's a lot of different exemptions. It would be interesting to see the questioner to see if they had something more specific to that. But I can't really comment more than that, just to say I'm open to having hearings on that. But again, projected shortfalls of up to $600 million at the beginning of the legislative session, up to $1.2 billion at the end of the fiscal year. So I'm not sure that would be possible, but I'm certainly open to having discussions about that.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Howe. Mr. Zamerslaw?
Sales tax exemptions, the ones that I've seen are usually on major purchases. When a business, when I used to write requests for information from people that would come in and build machinery for us. A lot of times the company that we were doing the work for would seek tax exemptions to help them be able to install the machinery. It's a spider web. It's almost like the Coke Industries. They're into everything. And I'm not sure how we can do that. I'm not. I'm willing to listen, but I don't have an answer for that.
Thank you. Moving on. Do you support expanding the Earned Income Tax Credit? Why or why not? And to you, Mr. Zamerslaw.
I do support it, but I think it needs to be done incrementally. I think that maybe it's by 0.5 or 1% per year over a few years until we find a level where it's actually kept up with inflation. So yeah, I do support it.
Thank you. Mr. Howe?
So tonight we've had a little bit of a discussion about revenue shortfalls, and on the other hand, we're talking about certain tax credits for various entities or sales tax exemptions. It's part of a bigger picture, and so I'm definitely open to discussing these things, but again, it's in the details. We really need to get some better numbers and data to make those decisions on. So certainly would welcome a vibrant discussion on that. It's been unique and a unique election year in a very unordinary year in itself. So wearing these things makes communication a little bit more difficult. But I do think we need a little bit more of this opportunity, especially for the people out there watching. And I think we can have some cordial discussions, and I think we could make some headway. So,
Thank you. Moving on to a different topic. Do you support the current efforts of Kansas Attorney General Derek Schmidt to overturn the Affordable Care Act and eliminate pre-existing condition coverage? To you, Mr. Howe.
I saw that question in advance, but are they specifically talking about a lawsuit, or what are they talking about? Do you know?
I'm not certain of the details.
Okay. Well, so I don't know if it's referring to if there's current litigation that the Attorney General is a part of. If he is, I am not aware of it, so I can't comment on that.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Zamerslaw, any comment?
Oh, sure. Derek Schmidt's part of a 20-some states and the federal government who are in front of the Supreme Court 1 week after the election to overturn the ACA, and that in turn will do away with pre-existing condition coverage. I am not in favor of the ACA the way it is now. Again, it's the Walmart economic theory. I think we can expand it to do a much better job, but that's at the federal level. What the state can do for now is to try to cover people with pre-existing conditions and not try to kick people off. Because right now, I forget how many people have tested positive again. 98,000 some now, I think, have tested positive for COVID. They have a pre-existing condition now.
Thank you. Talking about healthcare more generally, what efforts would you work towards to lower the cost of healthcare in Kansas, Mr. Zamerslaw?
One thing, if I'm a disabled vet, okay? I get most of my medications through the VA system. They negotiate for cheaper prices. Why can't Kansas do that? The insurance commissioner, Vicki Schmidt, is a pharmacist. I know her. She's a lovely person. We used to be neighbors. And she thinks it's a great idea too, to negotiate better prices. But again, unless there is some state framework, like Medicaid expansion, there's nothing she can do.
Thank you. Mr. Howe?
Right now, we don't have a free market economy in healthcare. Not really. I mean, a lot of the prices are negotiated behind some sort of a framework of government bureaucracy and hospitals and insurance companies. I want to empower consumers to have more understanding of each dollar they spend on healthcare. And so I would look for different solutions to do that, to empower consumers, regardless of their insurance status, to be able to afford more services in their communities.
Thank you. Please discuss the responsibility of an elected representative to vote on legislation based on what the constituents want, even if the representative personally would not be in favor of the legislation. Mr. Howe?
All right. So I find that kind of a strange question in a way. You know, if I've got 100 people knocking on my door saying, we need to legalize marijuana, and I don't personally have that same conviction, what do I do? Do I go along with what they want, or do I hold on to my personal conviction? So that is definitely a kind of a quandary, and I haven't been elected to public office yet, so I haven't faced that scenario. So, you know, I think at the end of the day, you have to be willing to vote your conscience. And if that costs you an election, then so be it.
Thank you, Mr. Howe. Mr. Zamerslaw?
Boy, I wish Washington, D.C. would vote their conscience. That would be great. I don't have a problem letting people know where I stand on an issue. If that's not what you want for that issue, don't vote for me. Don't send me to do your work if your work and my work aren't the same. If we do agree on 80% or 90% of the issues, then vote for me. We can work out the other 10 or 20%. I'm open for discussion. always.
Thank you. Moving to the budget. What do you think are the 3 most important items in the annual budget for the state of Kansas, Mr. Zammerslaw?
Oh boy, I even wrote that down. Education, regulation, and revenue streams. We need new revenue streams because the ones we have aren't going to get us out of this hole we're in. Whether that's some fancy accounting, the Bank of KDOT, Laura Kelly says she's not going to use anymore. Thank you. Regulations, I know that there are a number of regulations that are onerous. At one time, I'm sure they made perfect sense. Now they don't. Sam Brownback did one thing in the state that he started the office of the, what was his name? He went back and looked at regulations and things and did away with ones that didn't make sense. I think they're still doing that. That's not a bad idea. But we do need to make sure that we give our kids and young adults an adequate education at a price they can afford.
Thank you, Mr. Zammerslaw. Mr. Howe?
Yes, the 3 most important things, is that how it was referenced in the question? Well, if you look at the current budget as it is, 63 cents of every dollar goes to K-12 and higher education, and 28 cents of every dollar goes towards Medicaid and our social services. So I would say those 3 things are the most important things in our budget. And those are the 3 things that we might have the most difficulty coming to some sort of a compromise in terms of a budget for this next legislative year. But I would welcome the opportunity to have that discussion in a very civil manner.
Thank you. Are you in favor of raising the minimum wage to $15 per hour? Why or why not? To you, Mr. Howe.
I do not support raising the minimum wage to $15 per hour. I don't think the federal government or the state government should be involved in setting a base wage for everybody. I think the free market economy is the best way to regulate itself in different communities. There's different costs of living all across the United States. There's different costs of living here in our state of Kansas. So I think the best way to do that is through free market economies and to kind of let things work themselves out.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Howe. And to you, Mr. Zammerslaw?
Well, I am in favor of it incrementally again. I think that, I know some people maybe not remember, but our previous federal increases in minimum wage were incremental. There's no reason why we can't do that now. Being a retired union member, I retired fairly comfortably. The reason for that is because the union mantra is, together we stand, divided we fall. When employers have all the power over the employees, the employer takes the lion's share, and employees don't get a fair share.
Thank you. Can the Kansas legislature assist Can the Kansas legislature assist in inclusion and diversity efforts in Kansas? If so, how? To you, Mr. Zammerslaw.
First of all, we need to codify LGBTQ protections. This business of one governor writing a executive order where they're protected, and then the next governor doing away with that protection, and then the next governor giving them back, that's nuts. Let's just do it. It's actually probably better for us as a state to be more inclusive, to not discriminate, and I think the state can go a long way by just codifying it.
Thank you, Mr. Zammerslaw. And to you, Mr. Howe.
Going back to the previous question, I just want to make a comment regarding the minimum wage. I believe the minimum wage can be dangerous in the unintended consequences. When minimum wages are raised, it often puts teenagers or new people entering the workforce out of the way. We need to really get young people and give them opportunities to work, to give them opportunities to grow, so they can move on and earn a living and to do great things. It's amazing about the amount of teenagers in this area that I've talked to that actually have jobs and hold jobs to help support their family. Maybe they have a single mother or something like that, and so that extra income definitely helps. So I'd be hesitant about doing that because it can put them in a very tough situation, and I want them to be able to have jobs.
Thank you. We are coming to the end of our time for our public questions, so this will be your last question. What statewide changes could alleviate hunger in Kansas, the breadbasket of the world? To you, Mr. Howe.
Okay, so I saw that question. It's what can alleviate hunger in the world?
In Kansas.
In Kansas,
Yes.
okay. Well, one of the first things I did when I filed to run for public office was to take a tour of the Salina Emergency Area Food Bank. And what great things they do there. They really do. It's really truly a ministry of what they do there. They don't receive any state or federal taxpayer money. This is all through private citizens organizing, being generous of what they have, and being good stewards in their community. So I think it is certainly a model that could be, if we can project that story of what is being done here to other communities, I think that's a great model. Of course, there's a lot of foodstuffs that are produced here in Kansas, whether it's livestock or grains and things like that. So there's an abundance here that we can hopefully share with not only those in our community, but our state and the world.
Thank you, Mr. Howe. And to you, Mr. Zamerslaw.
Back to Wade just one last time. My first job was 11 years old. I bussed tables in a restaurant for 25 cents an hour, so I know what those jobs are like. In high school, I held 3 jobs at one time. What we can do to help alleviate the hunger in Kansas, how's about lowering fees on state and county services? Sam Brownback wanted to make Kansas more like Texas. Texas is a state where you pay for everything separately. State fees have gotten outrageous. County fees, registering your car, doing business with the county, it's just crazy. We can lower those fees and then do away with the food sales tax. It'd be big parts of it.
Thank you. And I'll turn it over to my co-moderator.
Thank you, Amy. We've come to the time this evening where we are going to allow each of our candidates 1 minute for their closing remarks. So we will go to Mr. Zamerslaw first.
Well, my name is Jeff Zamerslaw. It's spelled Z as zebra, A, M as Michael, R, Z as zebra, L-A. Remember that because I want you to look at that name when you go into the voting booth, and I want you to vote for me because my interests lie with the people who need to have a voice. I want to be your servant and work for you to make Salina a better place to live. Not that it's bad now, but it can always be better. So please get out and vote for Jeffrey A. Zamerslaw.
Thank you, Mr. Zamerslaw. Mr. Howe, it's your turn.
Yeah. Thank you. Again, my name is Stephen Howe. Thank you to all the viewers who tuned in. Thank you to the Salina League of Women Voters and the Salina Area Chamber of Commerce, our media panel, Salina Media Connection for putting this together. My name is Stephen Howe. I'm a husband. I'm a father of 4 boys, a small business owner, and I'm a full-time teacher at a private school here in Salina. I teach grade 5 and 6 humanities. During this election, I signed the Taxpayer Protection Act because I believe you need to keep more of your own tax money. I pledged not to raise taxes. I've also signed a pledge to support a resolution enacting term limits on members of Congress. I've been endorsed by the National Federation of Independent Businesses. I've been endorsed by the Kansas Farm Bureau, the Kansas Livestock Association, the Kansas Chamber of Commerce, and Kansans for Life. I would appreciate your trust and your vote in this year's election. Thank you again, and God bless.
Thank you both. Thank you to the media, and thanks for allowing me to be a part of your evening. I'm going to turn it over to Amy for closing remarks.
I would like to thank my co-moderator, James, our panel of media questioners. Thank you to the candidates for participating tonight, and thank you to the viewers for your interest in this election. Remember to vote before or on November 3rd, and have a good night.
Sunflower Electric Power Corporation, cooperative members working together to generate power so you can enjoy the benefits of life in central and western Kansas. Sunflower Electric Power Corporation, energy done right.